Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip hip hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Genes.
Welcome to CutOff Genes, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon-Jackson, and I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. How are you today, Julie?
I am a little chilly. I've got a heater on my feet because my feet turn into blocks of ice.
It's raining outside.
It is raining hard.
Did you see the hail yesterday?
I didn't see hail here. Did you see hail over there? You're 2 blocks from me.
I was looking out my window, and little hail pellets were hitting my balcony and my furniture, my little lawn furniture. I couldn't believe it. It kind of freaked the dog out.
I'm sure.
But, you know, this is like the anniversary of 1 year since everything shut down.
Happy anniversary.
Happy
Who
pandemic.
thought a year later we would still be not leaving our houses?
I know. It's funny because I remember thinking, how are we going to do this podcast? I mean, it wasn't my first thought, but I mean, truthfully. No, but we had to figure it out. And the first 1 or 2 were a little rocky. Remember trying to figure out how we could record it through Zoom and all that. So,
yeah, it works really well, though. We may never have to see each other in person again.
I don't have to clean the house before the podcast like I used to.
Oh, you never do. I mean, you do, but you don't have to. I know. You understand me.
I do. So I want to start off. I usually say, what's going on with DNA, Julie? But I want to talk about something that I thought was really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
So, I told you, I sent you this article, and you'd already read it, of course, because you're so good at this stuff. But there was an article, I guess it was this week, a couple of days ago, in the New York Times, and it was a woman's search for her birth parents leads to a story of murder. And I just read it because I thought, oh, this might be something interesting to talk about on the podcast. And I started reading it, and I was going, getting more and more interested, partially
because... This is exactly
because,
up our alley.
and even more personal to me in the things that we've talked about. Like, for instance, she said she was a theater kid.
Yep.
You know, and that she didn't know where she'd gotten that from because her parents weren't theater kids. It reminded me of
she's me.
Yeah, she reminded me of you. If your parent was on the one of your birth parents was on the FBI most wanted list.
As far as I know, no.
So in 2017, she retired and she decided to take a DNA test, and she knew she was an adoptee, and she took the test and discovered that her birth father is on the FBI most wanted list for killing his wife, his mother, and his 3 boys in 1976.
With a hammer.
With a hammer. A horrible, horrible crime. And, you know, she said it's the quintessential worst fear of an adoptee is to learn that your birth parents were, you know, axe murderers.
Yeah, I used to think the quintessential fear was that you would date a relative, but I think maybe this takes the cake on
this
that
is
one.
Up there, you know.
Yeah.
She doesn't think, because she was born long before this all happened, before the crime and all that she doesn't even think that this birth father ever knew about her.
Usually not.
Come to find out, she actually was raised in my hometown.
Yep.
Did you
I noticed
see that?
too. Yes. I was like, oh, that's where he got it. I thought maybe you had maybe you saw it because you have alerts for Stoughton, Mass.
I don't. Well, you know, even as I started the article, it said, you know, she was from North Carolina, so I didn't have any connection. But then halfway through the article, it said she was raised in a little town called Stoughton. And I was like, oh my God, that's so funny that's where I grew up too. So not that has any bearing on the story, but it made it more interesting to me.
Sure. Absolutely.
This guy has never been caught. Her birth father. He would now be 84 years old. They think he fled to Europe because he could speak several languages.
Right. Didn't they think that he was? They had found him, and he was like he was buried as a John Doe.
Yes. And they actually
exhumed him.
They exhumed the body of this John Doe and did the DNA test, and it was not this man.
Yeah. Right. So case back open.
Yeah. And I think her overall comment about this whole thing was like, when you do take a DNA test, be prepared that it could open a lot of doors, you know, positive and negative. And
yes.
We talk about that in this podcast all the time.
Yeah.
The surprises.
So many surprises.
Yeah,
so
they
many.
may not be as dramatic as my father wasn't, murdered his entire family, and boy, I probably dodged a bullet at some point.
Yeah, I would. It's interesting because she found her mother and she knows her, but she hasn't, for her own privacy, she didn't reveal who that was.
Right, her birth mother is gone now.
Oh, she is?
Yes.
Oh, I missed that part.
And said she never mentioned to her daughters that she raised. She actually had 3 children that she gave up for adoption.
Oh.
And this woman in the article has met them or has been in touch with them, all of them.
Right, but not the mother. I was under the impression she had met the mother. I see.
It said that the mother had never mentioned given up her children for adoption.
So she hadn't kept any children. She obviously wasn't maternal.
No, she did keep children because
she did.
Yes, because when she reached out to these half sisters of hers, she said it was such a shock to one of them. It took her like 6 months before she responded because she couldn't understand why her mother never told her.
Oh, she had been kept, but
Yes.
she also gave another 3 away.
She had given 3 away before the one she kept. So who knows? Maybe she.
I guess she liked being pregnant.
Well, maybe she just had 3. I don't know. 3 encounters before she got married or whatever it was. I mean, this woman in the article was born in 1957, so it was a different time.
Yeah, it was indeed. Oh boy.
But wow, isn't that fascinating? I mean, imagine looking through your family tree and finding more than your parents, or you have a goat stealer in your family.
Right. I mean, I found a lot of unusual things, including murder and suicide in my family tree, but this one takes the cake, I think. She has me beat, I would say.
It's probably even more disconcerting that he has never been found.
That's terrifying.
It's one thing if he's in prison or he's dead, but he could still be out there. Not that she has any worry as far as him knocking on her door, but I guess it could happen now that this is out in the open.
What if he read her book? What if he read her book and was like, "Hey,
yeah, right.
I got a kid. Finally, something I'm proud of. She can write." On the day he killed his family, he was working for the government, I think.
Was he really?
It says something about he left the State House and went and bought a sledgehammer.
You're absolutely right, yes.
The State Department. He worked in the State Department.
Yes, and on his way home from work, he bought a large hammer and beat his wife, mother, and 3 sons to death.
I mean...
And then he drove their battered bodies 6 hours south and left them burning in a shallow grave in North Carolina. I mean, it's horrific.
It's horrific. Absolutely horrific. Wow. And the FBI won't engage with her, which I thought was interesting because she wanted to compare her DNA to his, and they have his DNA.
Yes.
But they won't.
Right, because it doesn't serve a purpose for the crime itself, like to solve the crime.
I guess not, but it sure would be, once again, the adoptee has the least rights of anybody.
Of course, we just told her whole story, but I would love to have her on the podcast. We should find, if any listener knows, or maybe she's a listener, because she has a book as well that she's written about this. Her name is Kathy Gilchrist. If anybody knows her or of her, we would love to interview her. I would love to talk to her. If only because
get on that.
Because I went to Amazon to look at her book, and there were pictures of her, and she was like Miss Teen Stoughton, the town I grew up in.
She was?
Yes.
She is me.
Right? So you have a lot in common. We both have a little way into this,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a foregone conclusion that we're going to have her on the show.
Anyway, I just thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting. So this past week, I had an unusually slow week as far as work goes.
Yeah.
So I took a deep dive. When that happens, and I tend to, go back into my own history and do a little research just because that's what I do. Yeah. And I went into this crazy deep dive of, I've mentioned it before, my Fisher ancestors were victualers, which is tavern owners.
Oh,
basically.
Okay. I didn't know that word.
Yes. And my 4th great grandparents owned what was called the Tunnel End Tavern in the mid 1850s in a town called Diggle. And it was called the Tunnel End Tavern because it was just outside of the one end of the Standage Tunnel. that went from Marsden to Diggle, and it is known as the longest, highest, and deepest canal in the U.S. Canal meaning a boat canal.
Oh, okay.
It's like 2 miles long, and the narrow boats go through it. Okay, so the canal system in England is all over England, and because that's how, before trains, that's how they would ship goods from one place to another.
So this is not
built.
In Australia?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is in Yorkshire.
Okay. I was in another continent. I'm sorry.
Yes. No, this is in the UK. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't.
That's okay.
I thought for sure you'd understand that Diggle is in Yorkshire.
Well, they might have a Diggle in Australia as well. You
I'm
never
sure
know.
they do.
And there may even be a tunnel and tavern somewhere there.
I'm sure there is. So I went into this deep dive. There is an article written about my grandfather, my fourth great grandfather, and the Tunnel and Tavern, but it doesn't update anything. And of course, I've researched before, and two of the other taverns in the area that were also run by family are still there. But the Tunnel End is the one that I'm most interested in because it was written about and he was written about. So I'm constantly looking at maps of the area and trying to figure out where it actually was and is it still there?
Right. And could you get a discount on the tunnel burger if you ever went there and proved your DNA?
The tunnel burger. There is a hotel there, or in the general area. And doing some research on that place was they say it's a 15th century building or a 16th century building. So it's been there since the 1500s. You know something's built well if it still exists. Exactly.
Or it's been kept up well.
Right. So then it was just an ale house, and the family, according to the Sensies, actually lived in the building. It's a 3-story building. Mm-hmm. So it was an ale house, but they lived upstairs. And it was there for all of the people who took the long journey through the tunnel to stop for some refreshment after they got out. So I did this whole thing. Then I went onto YouTube and I looked at all these videos of the Standage Tunnel and footage of people going through the Standage Tunnel. It's creepy as hell, by the way. It's so scary in there. And there's also 3 railway tunnels that are still working in there.
So it is an actual tunnel, not just a canal. It actually goes through a mountain or something.
It goes through a hillside, and it's the deep into the hillside. And there are, if you walk over the top of the hillside from Marsden to Diggle, there's air shafts built into the hillside.
Yes. Okay.
It's fascinating. So I did that, and then I did this whole deep dive into narrow boats, which are the boats that go through. And it can't be any more than I think it's 12 feet wide or something like that. And then I did a deep dive into people who live on narrow boats.
As one does.
As one does.
And then I took a dive into showboat and saying,
yes,
just my bill.
Right. A not so narrow boat. A big showboat. So I went through this whole thing of, well, maybe I'll just retire in Diggle and live on a narrowboat and travel through Yorkshire on my boat. And I actually was like, this place is charming. I want to live here. And
but not necessarily on a boat. I can't see you living on a boat.
I couldn't live on a well. Yeah, I probably couldn't live on a boat.
Especially
I lived
narrow
on a boat.
Boat.
It was a cruise
certainly
ship.
Certainly nothing narrow enough to go through the tunnel.
I could live in a very small space if it was just me.
Yeah.
But then I would have to drive the boat, and that would be a whole
and not to mention get rid of your family.
Yeah, there's that too. So then I started looking at property in Diggle.
Oh my God.
I'm like, these are my people. But that's where my mind goes. And I don't know whether it's because, I've talked about it as an adoptee. In my particular case, there's been a lack of connection for me. I felt like where do I come from? Who are my people? What is my history? And I think I do this because I feel it gives me a connection to something that, to my blood, literally to my blood.
Right.
And I'm sure it's neither here nor there to most people, but for me, it's a real thing. It's a tangible connection thing, I think. Yeah.
Right.
So yes, Standage Tunnel. Google it, you guys. It's fascinating to me. So,
and it has a little history with your family.
I'm desperate for history, I'm telling you. Hey, one more thing before we break. Remember about a year ago we talked about a South Carolina man who was fighting for custody of his daughter who was adopted out without his permission?
Yes.
So let me see. His name was Christopher Emmanuel. And just recently he was finally granted full custody of his daughter.
Okay.
Years later, this happened in 2014.
I remember
she has
this.
been with this adoptive family in San Diego for all of these years.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking for her.
I know.
I mean, it's heartbreaking. I remember this story. We talked about it. It was heartbreaking for him because he did not know that this was happening. Right. He didn't know that his daughter was being adopted out, and he wanted to. Oh, yeah.
Right. It was so shady, because she was being adopted out of state, they got to, he knew that there was something shady going on with the mother. And so he actually took the steps to register with a registry that you can add your name. If you fathered a child, you can add your name to it in case that child comes up for adoption, and you have rights to either
right. But you figure it's 2021, and you said this has been going on for about 7 years. So this child is at least 7 years old now, and it's just heartbreaking that they're the only family that she's known.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, surely I don't know why because it happened literally. He registered 4 days before on February 4th, 2014 was when he added his name to the registry. The adopted parents didn't file an adoption motion until February 19th. To adopt her. So somebody dropped the ball, and they think it's because it was an out-of-state adoption that they didn't catch it or something.
Right.
And the reason because it was an out-of-state adoption is because she was biracial, and this archaic law that you can do out-of-state adoptions while skipping certain things because biracial children were considered harder to adopt.
Yeah, I remember this. This is a heartbreaking story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so
I don't know. I didn't even know how to feel about this. Like, I feel happy for the father in that he's getting what he wants, but I feel so badly for the family that adopted the girl, and for the girl.
I would like to think that that the family that adopted her were well aware that it was more likely a foster care situation at that point.
Yeah. But still 7 years later.
And I hope he was in her life. I know. I would really like to hope that everybody did the right thing by this child.
Yes, exactly. Right.
To make sure that she knew everything that was going on, and
I just think at some point it's like the end of Kramer versus Kramer. Spoiler alert from a 30-year-old, 40-year-old movie, but like the mother's been fighting for the custody the whole time through the movie, and at the end she realizes the best place for the child was with the father who was raising the child.
Spoiler alert: never seen Kramer versus Kramer.
God.
I guess I can't complain. It's been a little while since
it was kind of a
released.
seminal movie for me when I was a kid, because I was a child of divorced parents, and I saw that in the theater with my father, like when he would pick me up on the weekend. It was a tough, it stayed with me. Yeah.
Did it?
I'm kind of thinking now, when I think back, why did my dad take me to see that? Maybe because it made like a hero of the dad.
I bet it was his second time seeing it. And he's like, Richie needs to see this with me.
I'm going to have to unpack this on a break.
All right.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Jeans Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
All right, we're back. I have a quick trenches because it keeps happening. I don't know if you noticed that I posted. Remember, I had the NPE story, the last episode,
yes,
where I discovered that the grandmother, the biological mother, was actually not related to the father that raised her.
Yes. Yeah.
So the very next case I found the same situation.
Wow.
Very next case.
That's a coincidence.
I'm telling you.
Because it's not a common thing, right? I mean, this is not something you find
more
in a lot.
so than you would think. That's
Really?
why we have special Facebook pages for NPEs. It's a phenomenon. It can throw a whole investigation off if it's further up the line, up the tree. Because it'll just, you'll just never be able to connect people. But when it's the grandparents, it's easier it's obvious because you have two very separate lines that are not related to each other at all.
Right.
And then who is supposed to be the grandfather, there are no matches to his family.
And the further back you go, it's just harder to track that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, as is expected. So in this case, the client had her original birth certificate as well as the non-ID information, which I take with a grain of salt. Most of the time it's correct, sometimes not. So I have to be careful. What I'm really looking at is the DNA.
Right. It's the only thing that doesn't lie, right?
Exactly. Precisely. So there were two names on the birth certificate, and following traditional birth certificate procedures, that would be like the last name that they gave the child would be the father's last name, and then the mother's maiden name is listed. The mother is listed usually under her maiden name. And both of those names were Irish, and the non-ID listed her as Irish-Polish. Well, spoiler alert, a lot of spoiler alerts today. Her DNA was 100% Eastern European, not a wick of Irish or even Northern British, Northern European, and not a single Irish name. So I knew already that something was amiss in the non-ID. And I thought the mother was probably adopted too, which is a big problem because once again you have to work farther back. So when you have a mother's maiden name, that's great. What we're forgetting, or what a lot of people forget, is you can't just Google that person, or you can't find her in traditional registries because or search engines, because if she's married, she doesn't have that maiden name anymore, and she's virtually disappeared.
Right.
As I've said this before. So that presents a huge brick wall. And the reason why that happens is the fact that happens is one of the reasons why I've always kept Dixon as my middle name in case somebody was looking for me.
Yeah, no, I told you, like I try to find friends sometimes on Facebook and I can't find them, and I'm like, oh, they didn't put their maiden name in. I don't know what their married name is because they're from my childhood, Exactly. So I'd already confirmed who the bio father was, and he was 100% Eastern European. And as the day went on, I started to be discouraged. And I actually called her to let her know that it may be more of a marathon than a sprint, which is what happens in cases like this. No sooner had I ended our phone call when I just kept building. Suddenly an obituary popped up, and it contained both of the names on the birth certificate. Really?
For a relative of hers, for actually her mother, I think. I think it was the grandmother. So even though neither of those names were genetically connected to the client, this because her mother had been married to... Okay, so the name, let's say it was Bjorgi. The name of the mother's husband at the time was Bjorgi.
Yes. Not her real name. Yes.
Yes, that was her, and that was the mother's legal name at the time. So that was the last name the hospital gave the baby.
Oh, I see.
Because the mother was legally married to this Bjorgi gentleman. The maiden name was her stepfather's name. So, which tells me that her stepfather was presumably her father, or at least that's the name that she always went by. We don't know if she knew she was an NPE, just in the same situation as last week.
Right.
But we do know that she has no DNA to that name, and the DNA is to this other name. So I do know who the grandparents are. And once again, we're reaching out, and it'll be up to them whether or not they want to know how I figured it out, and whether they want to know whether or not.
Yeah, because you
really
found out
father.
secrets that you weren't looking for.
Twice in a row.
Right.
Twice in a row. Yeah. And by the way, on the first one, the biological mother did reach out to the client, and she wrote a lovely letter. Never mentioned anything. So I don't know if it'll ever come up as to who her father was. He did ask me to put the correct grandfather in the tree. So if he ever shares the tree with her, she'll know.
She'll find out.
Yeah, she'll find out. And that's his prerogative. It's his DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
And, everybody has that choice to find out or to not find out, right?
Exactly. Precisely.
Yes.
So, and my point in bringing that up again is that almost every time I work on multiple cases that are in various stages of investigation all the time.
Yeah.
But inevitably, I will always have two cases that are so similar, it keeps messing me up. I have to go back and look at the notes again to figure out which person I'm talking about. Either it's two people from the same town, the same general area.
Yes.
Or two people with the same last name. Two people of the same ethnic background with the same last name that we're looking for. It's every single time. I'm like, what is up with that? Why are we trying to... Anyway, so I have to be on my toes.
If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, Julie. This is why you're so good at your work, because you dig and dig and dig, and it's like a little puzzle, and you've got to put it together.
Yes.
Right?
You are correct.
Because I looked at my tree on ancestry because I hadn't looked at it in a while, and it had been shared with someone else, combined. I don't even know how that works, but somebody else added me to their tree, and I'm looking on it, and it's when you get deep into the tree, my mind just kind of falls apart. I can't follow it. Yeah,
the trees are difficult to navigate if you don't do it all the time.
Right.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And the number one thing I have to tell people, and this is a good advice for everybody, a lot of people, when they first look at a tree, it's usually in pedigree mode, which is sideways, which the tree is sideways, and you can just see the direct line. You don't see siblings. Mm-hmm. And they don't realize that there is the horizontal? No. The vertical view, which is up and down, and you can look at either on Ancestry, but a lot of people don't realize that. And so when I'm talking them through a tree on the phone, and they're like, I don't see that. And finally I'm like, oh, on the left, are you looking at that tree sideways or up and down? And they're like, sideways. And I'm like, okay.
But even with that, I mean, yes, I'm sure looking at it in a certain way would help. But, if you have a relative who, say, was married several times,
mm-hmm.
And there's that, and mm-hmm. it gets confusing, You see their different marriages, and you're like, okay, wait, which one am I related to? Because I didn't come from that line, from that marriage.
It takes practice. It takes practice to know how to read and understand a tree right away. Certainly. Yeah. I have one more thing. I have a book Nook.
Let's talk about the book Nook.
This is an amazing book that I recommend everybody from all parts of the adoption. I was going to say triad, but they don't say triad
Diaspora.
Sure.
I like the word diaspora.
It's a good word. You taught me how to say that. All right. Book Nook, American Baby, A Mother, a Child, and the Shadow History of Adoption by Gabrielle Glaser. Amazing book. It tells a singular story to illuminate a universal truth. And it's a story of a mother and her son's intimate tale that tells their story as it happened, but also goes into the history of what happened during the baby scoop era and how mothers were treated and children were treated and the secrets. And it talks a lot about her, this mother, Margaret Earl. she was coerced into surrendering her infant son to the infamous Louise Wise agency, who is known for making up stories about the biological family to entice people to adopt these babies. A lot of the times, mothers, I don't know if you know this, but mothers are people who were in mental health facilities. If they had a child in a mental health facility, the child was automatically taken from them, never to be seen again, no matter why they were in there. And it was common practice to make up a story about the parents, about who the parents were. And so the adoptive parents were not given the vital information that there were possibly mental health issues within the family.
I see. Because the idea was that the child wouldn't be adopted if somebody knew that the child was born of somebody in a mental institution.
Right. And they would also embellish who the mother really was. For instance, Margaret was, a regular Jewish girl from New York City, but there was this whole elaborate story that she got into a prestigious high school for science. She was highly intellectual, and she needed to give up her child to pursue her studies, none of which was true. And she actually was in a relationship with the biological father and later married him. They were together before the child was given up, but were never allowed to. Actually, they did get to see the child a couple of times, and they had a picture of him, but it was never an option that they could stop the adoption.
And why was that? Because she wasn't in an institution.
No.
You said she was a normal Jewish girl from New York.
Because she was coerced to sign papers to give him up. Yeah.
Because she wasn't married.
But she was married by the time he was adopted out, but they kept it a secret from her family and the father's family.
Right, but not when she had the baby. She wasn't married
Not
then.
when she actually had the baby. So the baby was not born to a married couple.
Right.
And so that apparently is the deal breaker to end all deal breakers.
I wonder if there was somebody whose job it was at these adoption agencies to literally write stories, like biographies of these parents. I'm sure. Complete fiction,
Absolute.
Because there was no way at the time to find out. They didn't know about the DNA. There were no DNA tests. There was,
they thought they were
closed
getting away
adoptions.
with it.
Yeah, crazy. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. And she tells the story about the mother. She was sent to an unwed mother's home on Staten Island that was horrific. The way that they treated her and the shame that they instilled in her, and just they would knock them out. They would drug them when they have the baby. They would put them in twilight sleep. And they would not let them hold the babies. They would often not let them even see the baby. We've talked to biological mothers like this that went through something very similar.
Yes.
It was very common in all over the world. Bottom line, read this book. It's so good. I couldn't put it down.
American Baby by
Gabrielle Glaser. American Baby, A Mother, a Child, and the Shadow History of Adoption. So good. And the stories are so good and so rich. The story of this man and his biological mother and their separate stories and the eventual coming together. Spoiler alert, we knew that was going to happen, but the most interesting part is how it happened.
Great. Look it up.
Yep.
We'll be back after a break.
All right.
Thank you for listening to CutOff Genes with Julie Dixon Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/CutOff Genes podcast. Now, back to the program.
Okay, it is story time, and this is the first part of my conversation with the delightful Cory Goodrich.
Great. You kind of teased this on the Facebook page and said it was such a great interview and you couldn't wait to share it.
I did. I have to say, Cory is our people. She's a musical theater girl.
Oh.
And I'm not sure how she found us or we found her, but she's just a lot of fun. She's somebody who, if we lived in the same town, I'm sure we would hang out.
Oh, that's so fun. Okay, well, Let's listen.
All righty. Hey, guys, I have on the line Cory Goodrich, who reached out to me. She has a wonderful book. Hi, Cory.
Hello. How are you doing?
That was quite the intro, wasn't it? I don't know who I was there for a second.
Well, do any of us really know who we are? And doesn't that lead right into our conversation?
Wow. What a perfect setup. Thank you so much for that.
I'll be your straight man anytime.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So, Cory, you wrote a book called, tell me the name.
Folk Song, A Ballad of Death, Discovery, and DNA.
Beautiful. And now I actually started to read your book, and I loved what I was reading, but I decided I didn't want to know the end until I heard it from you directly.
Ooh, okay. So I could change it. I could totally make up a whole different story, and you won't know until you read the book.
And that will totally mess me up, and the time-space continuum will be ruined forever. So, I want to hear, because I love your voice. I love hearing the way you tell your story. So I would like to hear you tell us today.
Let me tell you a little story, boys and girls.
Yeah.
No, it's
By
funny
the way, let's do a little aside. We're both actresses, and we have a lot of mutual friends in the musical theater industry, correct?
We do, and we need to talk about that too at some point.
Yes, we will. It was so funny because when I first got your email, I was like, oh, this person seems familiar. It's so funny when it's somebody that does the same thing that I do or did. There's just like an instant connection to where we speak the same language. I get it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I love that about you too. The second I heard you speak, I was like, oh yeah, I know what kind of person this is.
Yes,
my people.
Exactly. Yes, somebody who we would have fun in the dressing room. Okay, so I want to hear the story, and so does everybody else. So, ready, set, go.
Yeah, let me tell you. So when I started writing this book initially, I did a lot of time jumps because I started writing after my mother died. That's spoiler alert. That's going to happen. So, but I kept flashing back to points in my youth, and then I would flash forward to where I was after my mother's death. And so sometimes when I tell this story, there's some time jumps. I'm just warning you because we go back and forth thinking about things. But if I can try chronologically, so I was born in Delaware. Mm-hmm. I was the youngest of four, Tommy, Susie, Dale, me, Cory, and I was the daughter of Tom Goodrich and Ernestine. Goodrich is still my last name now. Sure. So I was, 7 years, born 7 years after my closest sibling, Dale. So, there's an age gap there.
Oh, 7 years. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, and my dad, Tom, was 56 when I was born, so he was an older father. My parents were divorced when I was 7, almost 8 years old, and we moved to Michigan. My mother married a man named Jim, who was my stepfather, and Tom stayed back in Delaware. So I kind of was shuttled between Delaware and Michigan, kind of growing up, and I didn't spend a lot of time with my dad, only in the summers, but my mom never seemed happy in Michigan, for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's a big culture shock between the East Coast and the Midwest, mm-hmm. and she was, how old was she at this time? 44-ish, if I can do math, 44, 45. So she's starting this whole new life. She's sort of happy, but she is not completely happy. I hear her crying in the bedroom a lot, and she calls me in to sleep with her in the mornings, and she just seems so lonely. I grew up this way, and as I get older, I start questioning, because I'm not happy. It wasn't the happiest of relationships, with my stepdad at the time, and so I was struggling, and my brother was struggling because he was there too. The oldest two were in college, so they never lived in Michigan. But I would ask her, why did you do this? Why did you get divorced? Why did you marry Jim? Why did you pull me away from Delaware? All these things. And she would never answer me. She gave me a lot of non-answers. Your father was a lot older than I was, and I wanted to go out and have fun, and he wanted to stay home. And she would never talk about it. She never said a bad word about my father, and Tom never said a bad word about her. But I had this feeling, like so many of us do, that I was something different. Mm-hmm. I didn't fit in the same way with my other siblings. They're very, I love them all dearly. They're all very reserved, and they're really funny, but they're quiet. Yeah. And you can tell by talking to me already that I am not quiet.
Yes.
So there's this feeling of just like, something is off. What the heck is it? But when I would question my mom, she would shut me down. And so I kind of learned to ask but not ask, Mm-hmm. There was one point when I think I was in high school. I was looking for a picture for the Name That Senior contest that they frequently have where you have a baby picture.
Oh, yes.
They always look like me.
Yes.
So, I'm dressed up in costumes in all these shots. And I'm in the drama club at this point. So everybody's going to know who it's me, who it is. So we're in the box of pictures, and there are all these photographs, regular photographs of my 3 other siblings. And all of my pictures are Polaroids. And they're not with the other ones. They're always just of me by myself. There's a couple shots, Christmas card shots, of the 4 of us, and no pictures of me with Daddy, no pictures of me with my mother, really. And so there's the Cory box, the Polaroid box. We're going through this. And in this box, I find a picture of a man holding a baby, and it's labeled on the back, Cory, 9.5 months. So it's me. And I'm like, who's this man? Mama. And yes, I'm a grown woman, and I still call them Mama and Daddy. Don't laugh at me.
Sure, that's okay.
It's a Delaware thing. So anyway, she says, well, that was a friend of mine. Your father was really jealous of him, and I will never forgive him for what he did to him. Like, oh, what did he do?
Oh.
And she kind of hemmed and hawed. She said, well, he was really jealous of him, and he had him transferred down south. Oh. And I said, what happened to the guy? And she said he had a heart attack and died.
Okay.
But that's it. This is all. And we put the picture away, and I remember this so vividly. I remember where I was sitting in the closet. I remember the light coming through the window in the closet and the dust particles through the pictures. I mean, but why do I remember it? We live 1,000 moments that we forget. I don't remember breakfast this morning, but certain things stick in our memory, but we don't quite know why.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of those moments. So I kind of tucked that away and forgot about it. And
how old were you at that time?
I'm guessing I was 16. If I was a senior, I would have been 16, 17 years old at that point. Mm-hmm. So in college, it's continuing. Like, as I'm growing up, I continue to fight with my mother to get these answers. She never gives me, After I had my first daughter, I finally decided, I'm like, I don't want to fight with her anymore. This is just too contentious. We would always end up in screaming matches, And at one of these, I think it was like the last screaming match, she's like, there are things you don't know about your father, Cory. Oh, boy. And I stormed upstairs, and I'm thinking, what?
What does that mean?
What don't I know about my father? Did he beat her? Did he, So I'm processing this, and but I don't want to fight with her anymore. So we just kind of drop it. I end up having 2 children, and she had a lovely relationship with the 2 of them. And I mean, these fights, don't get me wrong, these weren't like I hate you type fights. They were just mother-daughter arguments. And,
sure.
So the week, I had just done a show at Peninsula Players, Bridges of Madison County, ironically, which is, of course, the story about an affair.
Uh-huh.
And I had done a lot of talking with my mother about this role and what I wanted to do with it and what I believed. And I'm secretly kind of poking the bear a little bit with her.
Oh, interesting.
I'm saying, I think that the reason Francesca makes the choice that she does to stay with her husband instead of going with Robert or Clint Eastwood is because of the children, because she really chose her children. I'm such a jerk. Like, these are moments that I wish I could roll back in time and, do them over. I'm being slightly,
yes,
saying, you didn't make that choice, Mama,
Right. You're being, the poking the bear is the perfect way to put that. Like, it's passive aggressive.
Yes. Total brat.
And I totally endorse it, by the way. That's something I would do.
Thank you.
Okay.
See, I knew you'd get me.
Yeah.
But I remember her saying, she was just kind of sad and wistful, and she's like, well, do you think she should, asking, do you think she should have done that? And we talked about it, but I don't remember really what she said, Anyway, so after I do this show, she tells me that she's going to have open heart surgery. Now, she's 89 years old. I know this is not a good idea at all, but she's like, I've lived a good life. This is what I want to do. I don't want to live in this condition 1 second longer. So I went out to be with her, and I got to spend the week before her surgery with her, and she was so frail and so weak by this point that I didn't want to ask anything. Yeah. But I go back through my journal of this time, and I've got some song lyrics that, talk about why am I always going to be a question mark, Now, if you asked me why I was writing that, I wouldn't have told you. I just knew there was something, but I didn't know quite what, I would tell people, apparently, I don't remember this, but when I tell the story, my friends will sometimes say, oh, you told me that you didn't think your father was your father. And I said, what, I did? I was like, oh, yeah, don't you remember that? I'm like, no, not really. Or I joke about it. Yeah.
That you don't remember that.
I mean, I sort of do, but, I would joke about it sometimes in the dressing room, and then I'd feel really bad because, that is not something that I should be joking about. And am I drawing attention to myself by, telling, So I would kind of backpedal. My daughter said it to me, too. She's like, Mom, you said that to me. I'm like, I did? Really? She's like, yeah.
Okay.
So in this week before my mother's surgery, two things happened. One is I had done Ancestry DNA a few months earlier, and I pull up my results on the computer, and Dale is there with me, and I say, look at this. So we can see that, I am this percentage of this, and look, there's Norwegian. I didn't think Daddy was Norwegian, but apparently he must have been, he's so tall and blonde, and my mother crowds closer to the computer, and Dale crowds closer to the computer, and I show her the section where it's like, well, these people are connected to me by DNA. So they're cousins or whatever. I don't know who any of these people are, though, so this is really strange. Oh, well,
Yeah.
And just let it go. It was right there in front of me. It was right in front of my mother. Nothing. Nobody said anything. A couple days later.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy? No,
it's very common. It's very common that people look at it and they're like, I don't, because even, people don't really get it or take it seriously or realize that these people are as close as they actually are.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Or don't want to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's very vague. And if you haven't really read up on it, it's not going to really mean that much to you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. So I don't feel so.
Yeah. Don't feel crazy. Yeah. It's okay.
So the next thing was I took her shopping for a robe because she wanted a robe. I knew she didn't need a robe for the hospital, but she wanted to go shopping. So we went out, and I was driving the car, which is weird because you never drive your parents' car,
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to try this one more time. I'm just going to ask, Mama, why did you and Daddy get divorced? And she says, well, I had an affair. You knew that, Cory. I was like, kind of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, here's what I remember. I remember being in a hotel room with my mother and another man when I was little.
Okay.
I remember a crib, so I must have been pretty young. I remember that there was a door, in between the two hotel rooms. I love those doors.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
That connect. So
it feels very special.
But that's all I remember.
Yes.
So I think, well, okay, I do have this memory. So I knew she had an affair, but I didn't really know. Didn't hear it from her or from my siblings or anything. So
maybe she thinks that she told you she had an affair when she told you that your father had him transferred.
I think she did.
Yeah.
I think she thought I figured it out.
Sometimes people have conversations in their head that they think they said out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And she was probably living in this secret,
Yeah.
But, she said, the woman, his wife came to the house, and she begged me not to take her husband. And she was very well dressed and very poised. I was very impressed with her.
Oh.
And I'm driving through Green Valley going,
interesting.
Well, so what did you do? Did you leave him alone? And she said, yes, I left him alone.
All right. And that is where it is ending this week.
Great. We'll hear more next time.
Yeah, we'll hear the resolve. This is definitely a 2-part episode. But thank you so much, Cory, for talking to me. The book, I don't have it in front of me. I think it's called Folk Song. But she mentions it at the beginning of the interview, and I'll put a link to it in the Facebook group as well. And I can't wait for you guys to hear the rest of it.
Great. In the meanwhile, I am Richard Castle. Go to my website, richardcastle.com, which I'm in the process of updating. And you could also follow me at Castle Songs on Twitter and on Instagram. And what about you, Julie? How do we get in touch with you?
Well, I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can find me on Twitter at Jules Jackson with 2 O's. Find the podcast at CutOff Jeans Pod. Join our Facebook group, the CutOff Jeans Podcast. Send me an email, julejackson@cutoffjeans.com.
And I'll tell you the truth. The jeans I was wearing ended up getting like a little hole in the crotch. And so I had to order some new ones. And I hope that they come with what's most important.
The truth is in your jeans.